Victoria Lawson had learned to move through her days with quiet precision. In Austin, Texas, where her company's offices stood just outside the downtown corridor, she was known as decisive, composed, and relentlessly reliable. Meetings began on time. Numbers were checked twice. Contracts were reviewed line by line. Her staff respected her not because she raised her voice, but because she never allowed anything to fall apart. What few people saw was how much effort it took to keep that reputation intact. At home, the silence was heavier. The Lawson house sat on a wide, tree-lined property, tasteful and well-kept, but often painfully quiet. Thomas Lawson, her husband of 40 years, had been confined to a wheelchair since the accident. It had happened years ago, sudden and unforgiving, the kind of event that divided life into a clear before and after. Thomas survived, but the damage was permanent. He could no longer walk, no longer move freely through the world they had once navigated side by side. Their marriage endured. In many ways it deepened. There were no dramatic arguments, no bitterness spoken aloud. There was love, loyalty, and an unspoken understanding that neither would abandon the other. Still, exhaustion lingered in the corners of their lives. Victoria carried the weight of the business, the household, and Thomas's emotional well-being alone. She never said it out loud, but some nights when the house finally went still, she felt the strain settle into her bones. The business had once been theirs together, years earlier when they were younger and hungrier. Victoria and Thomas had built it from nothing. They worked late, took risks, argued over strategy, and celebrated small victories with cheap wine and tired laughter. Thomas had been the visionary, quick with ideas. Victoria had been the anchor, steady and relentless. When the accident took Thomas's mobility, it was Victoria who stepped fully into leadership. She did it without hesitation, knowing that if she faltered, everything they had built would collapse. At home, the challenges were quieter but no less draining. Thomas needed daily assistance. He could manage some tasks on his own, but not enough to be left unattended for long stretches. Over the years, Victoria had hired several caregivers. Each time, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. Each time, the hope was worn down. Some were careless, cutting corners when they thought no one was watching. Others were inattentive, impatient, or plainly unsuitable for the responsibility. One had stolen jewelry from the bedroom. Another had taken cash from a drawer, assuming it would go unnoticed. Victoria noticed everything. By the time she dismissed the last caregiver, her trust was thin. She reviewed resumes late at night, after finishing reports and answering emails, her eyes blurring as she tried to imagine inviting another stranger into their home. Thomas never complained. That somehow made it worse. He thanked her for everything, apologized for needing help, and retreated into long stretches of silence when the days grew too repetitive. Victoria recognized the signs. She had watched grief hollow him out once before. Their only son, Evan, had been gone for years. The loss had never truly settled into something manageable. There were rooms in the house Victoria rarely entered now, drawers she had not opened since the funeral. Evan's absence lingered everywhere in photographs carefully stored away, in habits that no longer made sense. The accident that took Thomas's mobility had followed not long after. In the span of a few years, Victoria had lost the future she thought was guaranteed, then fought fiercely to preserve what remained. From the outside, her life appeared controlled, even enviable. A successful company, a long marriage, financial security. Inside, it felt like a careful balancing act that could tip at any moment. Mornings began early. Evenings ended late. Between conference calls and hospital appointments, Victoria learned to compartmentalize her fear, her grief, and her fatigue. She told herself there was no other option. Some nights, as she moved through the quiet house, checking doors and turning off lights, Victoria wondered how long she could keep holding everything together alone. She did not voice the question. She simply prepared for the next day, as she always had, determined that nothing, no matter how heavy, would be allowed to fall. The cold cut sharply that afternoon. A thin winter wind swept across the supermarket parking lot, rattling loose carts and sending dry leaves skittering across the asphalt. Victoria Lawson had just pulled into a parking space near the entrance, already mentally reviewing a short grocery list and the calls she still needed to return before evening. Her phone vibrated in her purse, but she ignored it for the moment, preferring a few quiet minutes before the next obligation demanded her attention. As she stepped out of the car, she noticed them. Near the wall by the entrance stood a young woman and a small boy. The child, no more than 6, was bundled carefully in a thick jacket and knit hat. His gloves were mismatched but warm. The woman holding his hand, however, was dressed far too lightly for the weather. Her coat was thin and worn, her shoes scuffed and clearly not meant for cold pavement. A scarf was wrapped tightly around her neck, as if she were trying to make it do the work of a heavier jacket. They were not begging. They were not approaching anyone. They simply stood there uncertain. The boy pressed close to his mother's side. Victoria had seen enough over the years to recognize the difference. This was not performance or manipulation. This was hesitation. This was someone who had nowhere else to go and no idea what to do next. Victoria slowed her steps without fully realizing it. The woman's eyes flicked toward passing shoppers, then away again, as though she were bracing herself for rejection that had not yet come. The boy shifted his weight from foot to foot, trying to stay warm. Victoria felt a familiar tightening in her chest. She told herself to keep walking. There were always reasons to keep walking. She did not. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice calm and measured. "Are you all right?" The woman startled, clearly unprepared to be addressed at all. Up close, she looked even younger than Victoria had first thought. Tired, yes, but not careless. Protective. The kind of person who made sure her child was warm before thinking of herself. "My name is Victoria Lawson," Victoria continued, offering a small professional smile. "I don't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help noticing you might be in some difficulty." The woman hesitated before answering. "I'm Claire," she said finally. Her grip on the boy's hand tightened slightly. "This is my son, Noah." Victoria nodded, acknowledging the child, who watched her with cautious curiosity. "I'm looking for a caregiver," Victoria said, choosing her words carefully. "My husband is disabled. The position would include room and board. And fair pay." Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed again just as quickly. Fear crossed her face, followed by suspicion. She had clearly learned to be careful. "You don't even know me," she said. "I have a child. I'm not in a position to take risks." Victoria understood that tone. She reached into her purse and removed a business card, holding it out rather than pressing it into Claire's hand. "You don't have to decide anything right now. This is my name, my company, and my office address. You're welcome to verify everything." Claire stared at the card, then at Victoria, weighing her options. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as though the effort of standing upright had finally caught up with her. "We don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted quietly. "I just got off a bus. I was trying to figure out what to do next." Victoria felt the decision settle inside her, firm and immediate. "If you're willing," she said, "you can come with me now. At least to get warm. Then we can talk." Claire looked down at Noah, then back up. There was fear in her eyes, but there was also something else. Relief, fragile and uncertain. Finally, she nodded. "I don't have another choice," she said. Victoria opened the car door and stepped aside, making space for them both. As Claire and Noah climbed inside, Victoria knew this moment would matter. She did not yet know how. She only knew that something had shifted, quietly but irrevocably, in the cold air outside the supermarket. The Lawson home sat back from the road, framed by tall trees and a wide driveway that curved gently toward the front entrance. As Victoria parked the car and stepped out, Claire remained seated for a moment, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on the house. Noah pressed his face briefly to the window, taking it all in with open curiosity. He had never seen anything like this before. "You can come inside," Victoria said gently. "It's warm." Claire nodded and helped Noah out of the car. The boy stayed close to her side as they walked toward the door, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Inside, the house was quiet but welcoming, soft lighting, clean lines, the faint scent of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee. Claire slowed her steps, suddenly aware of how out of place she felt, how little she owned beyond the small bag she carried. Before she could gather herself further, a voice came from the hallway. "Victoria, is that you?" Thomas Lawson appeared in his wheelchair, moving with practiced ease. He was neatly dressed, his hair silvered at the temples, his expression open and warm. When he saw Claire and Noah, he paused, then smiled. "Well," he said lightly, "it looks like we have company." Victoria crossed the room and leaned down to kiss his cheek. "Thomas, this is Claire," she said, "and this is her son, Noah. Claire will be helping us here." Thomas turned his attention fully to the boy, lowering himself slightly so they were at eye level. "Hello, Noah," he said. "I'm Thomas. Welcome to our home." Noah studied him for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "Hi," he replied. "There's something I think you might like," Thomas added, his eyes brightening. "I have a model ship in my study. I built it myself. Took me months. Would you like to see it?" Noah's grip on his mother's hand loosened. "A real ship?" he asked. "A very real one," Thomas said. "At least as real as a model can be." That was enough. Noah glanced up at Claire for permission. When she nodded, he followed Thomas down the hall, his earlier shyness already fading. Claire watched them go, stunned by how easily the boy had relaxed. Victoria noticed and gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's get you settled," she said. "You can put your things in the guest room for now." Over the next hour, Claire moved carefully through the house, learning its rhythms. She listened closely as Victoria explained Thomas's daily routine, the medications, the physical therapy exercises, the small details that mattered. Claire asked thoughtful questions, took notes without being prompted, and approached each task with quiet seriousness. When she helped Thomas adjust his position later that afternoon, she did so gently, respectfully, without the impatience or awkwardness Victoria had seen before in others. Thomas noticed too. He corrected her once, calmly, and she accepted the instruction without defensiveness, repeating the motion until she did it right. "You're doing fine," he said. "Most people rush." "I won't," Claire replied simply. Noah spent the afternoon in Thomas's study, sitting cross-legged on the rug as Thomas showed him the ship piece by piece. They played a game of dominoes. They read a few pages from a worn adventure book Thomas kept nearby. They talked about nothing important at all. Victoria watched from a distance, careful not to intrude. She noticed how Thomas laughed more easily, how he sat a little straighter in his chair. The heavy stillness that had clung to him in recent months seemed to loosen its grip. That evening, they ate dinner together at the kitchen table. Claire cooked with quiet efficiency, grateful for the chance to do something familiar. Noah spoke animatedly about the ship, about Thomas's stories, about how many books there were in the house. Thomas listened, engaged, asking questions. As the night settled in and the house grew quiet again, Victoria realized something had changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of voices, of movement, of possibility. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive. The house settled into its nighttime rhythm, slowly. Noah was asleep in the guest room, his small body curled beneath thick blankets, his breathing even and soft. Thomas had retired to his bedroom early, tired but content in a way Victoria had not seen in years. The lights in the kitchen were dimmed, leaving only the warm glow above the table where Victoria and Claire sat with 2 untouched cups of tea between them. It was Claire who spoke first. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her hands wrapped around the mug as if for warmth. "I don't usually talk this much. It's been a long time since anyone asked without judging." Victoria nodded, encouraging but silent. Claire took a breath. "I grew up in a small rural town," she began. "Just my mother and me at first. My father left when I was a baby. I don't even remember him. My mother worked herself into the ground trying to keep things together. I helped where I could. Everyone did, out there. You learn young." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I was 13, my mother remarried. My stepfather seemed decent at first, helpful, but that didn't last. He drank. He lost his temper. He took it out on both of us." Claire's voice stayed steady, but her eyes betrayed the effort it took. "I begged my mother to leave him. She was afraid of being alone, afraid of what people would say." Victoria listened without interruption. She recognized the quiet resignation in Claire's tone, the kind that came from surviving, not from healing. "I left as soon as I finished high school," Claire continued. "Moved to the city, waitressed, rented a tiny room. It wasn't much, but it was mine." Her mouth tightened slightly. "Then I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. The relationship fell apart almost immediately. I didn't have anyone to turn to." She looked down at her hands. "I went back home to give birth. My mother accepted me and Noah without hesitation. She loved him completely. But my stepfather, he made it clear we weren't welcome. After my mother died, it got worse. He said the house wasn't mine, that I was a burden. One morning, he told me to leave." Victoria felt a familiar ache in her chest, loss layered on loss. She had lived that kind of accumulation herself. "We left with what we could carry," Claire said. "After that, it was shelters, short-term rooms, buses. I worked when I could, saved every dollar." Victoria glanced toward the hallway where Noah slept. "And his leg?" she asked gently. Claire's face softened, then tightened again. "He fell from a tree when he was little, broke it badly. We were in a town without proper medical care. The fracture healed wrong. Doctors later told me it needs corrective surgery. Expensive surgery." She exhaled slowly. "I've been saving for years. Every tip, every extra shift. I don't spend on myself. I just keep hoping I'll have enough someday." Victoria said nothing at first. She studied Claire's face, the fatigue, the resolve, the careful control. It was impossible not to see herself reflected there. Different paths, similar burdens. "You've done everything you could," Victoria said finally. Claire shook her head. "It never feels like enough." The words lingered between them. Victoria understood them intimately. She thought of Evan, of Thomas, of the years spent holding everything together while convincing herself she was managing just fine. "I won't make promises I can't keep," Victoria said after a moment. Her voice was calm, measured. "But I will say this, you and Noah are safe here. We'll take things one step at a time." Claire looked up, surprise flickering across her face. She nodded slowly. "That's more than anyone's ever said before." They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Two women bound, not by blood, but by endurance, by the shared understanding of what it meant to keep going when life offered no easy mercy. As Victoria turned off the kitchen light later that night, she paused at the doorway, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Somewhere inside her, a decision had already been made. She did not name it yet. She did not speak it aloud, but she knew she would not look away. Victoria had not intended to celebrate quietly. 40 years of marriage deserved acknowledgement, not as a performance for others, but as a marker of survival. She chose one of Austin's most refined music venues, a space known for its warm acoustics and understated elegance. The guest list was carefully curated: longtime business partners, a handful of close friends, people who had walked beside the Lawsons through success and loss alike. The weeks leading up to the event were meticulously planned. Catering was confirmed. Lighting was tested. Seating was arranged to ensure Thomas could move comfortably throughout the space. Victoria supervised every detail with the same precision she brought to her company. This night mattered to her more than she admitted, even to herself. Thomas was dressed impeccably, his posture dignified in his wheelchair, his expression calm and quietly pleased. He accepted congratulations with an ease that surprised Victoria. It had been a long time since he had been among so many people. She watched him closely, alert for signs of fatigue, but he seemed energized by the atmosphere. Claire attended in her role as Thomas's caregiver, standing slightly apart at first, dressed simply but neatly. She had never been to a place like this before. Noah had stayed home under careful supervision, excited for his mother but more comfortable in familiar surroundings. Claire was grateful for that. Crowds still made her uneasy. The evening unfolded smoothly at first. Guests mingled. Wine flowed. Conversations rose and fell in gentle waves. Victoria allowed herself to relax just a little. She listened as friends spoke warmly of her marriage, of her resilience, of the partnership she and Thomas had built. For a moment, the years of strain receded. Then her phone vibrated. Victoria glanced at the screen and felt her stomach tighten. She stepped aside to take the call, already sensing something was wrong. The voice on the other end was apologetic and strained. The singer they had hired, an established local performer, had fallen ill unexpectedly. There would be no appearance that evening. Victoria ended the call and stood still, the hum of the room suddenly too loud. Music had been the centerpiece of the celebration. Guests were expecting a performance. Without it, the evening would lose its shape. She scanned the room, calculating how quickly disappointment might spread. Word traveled fast. A few guests noticed her expression change. Questions followed, whispered and curious. Victoria forced a polite smile, assuring everyone there was nothing to worry about. But inside, panic threatened to surface. She had planned this night to honor Thomas, to give him something joyful. The idea of it unraveling felt unbearable. It was Claire who approached her. "I heard there's a problem," Claire said quietly. "With the singer." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "She won't be coming." There was a brief pause. Claire took a breath. "If it helps," she said carefully, "I could sing." Victoria stared at her, genuinely taken aback. "Sing." "I'm not a professional," Claire added quickly, "and I don't want to cause trouble, but I've sung before. If you need something, just to fill the space." Victoria's first instinct was fear. Embarrassment followed close behind. This room was full of people accustomed to polished performances and curated talent. The risk of turning the evening into something awkward felt too high. She opened her mouth to decline. Before she could speak, Thomas rolled closer, having noticed the tension between them. "What's going on?" he asked. Claire repeated her offer, her voice steady despite the flush creeping into her cheeks. Victoria shook her head slightly, about to intervene, but Thomas raised a hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. Victoria looked at him sharply. "Thomas!" He met her gaze, calm and resolute. "This night is about us, about honesty, not about perfection." He turned toward the room and signaled for attention. Conversations quieted as guests focused on him. Thomas's voice carried clearly. "Friends," he said, smiling, "we've had a small change in plans. Our scheduled performer couldn't join us tonight, but instead of disappointment, we're choosing something different." He gestured toward Claire. "This is Claire Dawson. She cares for me with more dedication than I can properly thank her for. Tonight, She's agreed to share a song with us as a gift." A murmur rippled through the room. Surprise, curiosity, polite applause. Claire stood frozen for a moment, then nodded, stepping forward as the attention settled on her. Victoria watched, her heart pounding, uncertain whether to stop what was unfolding or trust the moment. The lights dimmed slightly. The room grew still, and Claire took the stage. Claire stood under the softened lights, the microphone steady in her hands despite the tremor in her chest. For a moment, she said nothing. The room, once filled with conversation and clinking glasses, fell into a quiet so complete it felt deliberate. She closed her eyes, drew a breath, and began to sing. Her voice was unadorned. No flourish, no effort to impress. It carried instead a depth that came from memory rather than technique. The melody unfolded slowly, each line delivered with a restraint that made the words feel heavier, more intimate. The sound filled the room without force, warm and unmistakably human. People stopped moving. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Even those who had arrived expecting an elegant diversion found themselves caught, leaning forward without realizing it. The song did not demand attention. It earned it. Victoria felt the change immediately. At the first chorus, her breath caught. She straightened in her chair, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. By the second verse, tears were already blurring her vision. She did not try to stop them. The recognition was instant and devastating. It was Evan's song. Her son had played it endlessly, on the radio, on his guitar, softly under his breath when he thought no one was listening. He had loved it with the uncomplicated devotion of youth, the kind that believed certain feelings would last forever. Hearing it now, in this place from this woman, felt like having the past reach out and take her by the hand. Victoria covered her mouth, the sound of the room fading until all she could hear was Claire's voice and the echo of a life that had ended too soon. Beside her, Thomas noticed the change, his expression tightening as he followed her gaze toward the stage. He did not interrupt. He knew better. Claire sang on, unaware of the private collapse happening just a few feet away. When the final note faded, the silence held for a beat longer, as if no one dared to break it too quickly. Then the room erupted into applause, long, sustained, genuine. People rose to their feet. Some wiped their eyes without understanding why. Claire nodded in thanks, her face flushed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She stepped back from the microphone, already preparing to leave the stage. That was when Victoria stood. She did not wait for the applause to die down. She moved forward, her steps unsteady but determined. When she reached Claire, she spoke quietly, urgently. "That song," Victoria said. "Why that one?" Claire hesitated, surprised by the intensity in her voice. "It's personal," she replied. "It was important to someone I loved." "Who?" Victoria asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Claire swallowed. His name was Evan. The word landed like a blow. Victoria's knees weakened. For a moment, she thought she might fall, but she steadied herself and reached into her clutch with trembling hands. She pulled out a photograph she carried more often than she admitted. A picture of Evan taken years ago, smiling, careless, alive. "Is this him?" she asked. Claire took the photo. Her breath left her in a sharp, broken sound. Color drained from her face. Her fingers tightened around the image as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Then her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, the photograph slipping from her hand. The room surged into motion. Chairs scraped back. Voices rose in alarm. Someone called for water. Thomas rolled forward as quickly as he could, his face pale, his hand shaking. "Claire," he said. "Claire, can you hear me?" She came back slowly, gasping, tears streaming unchecked down her face. She looked from the photograph to Victoria, then to Thomas, comprehension dawning with terrible clarity. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Evan. He's Noah's father." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Victoria stared at her, the room spinning. "Noah," she repeated. "Your son." Claire nodded, unable to speak at first. When she finally did, her voice broke completely. "He never knew. Evan didn't know. We were young. We fought. I found out I was pregnant after we separated. Then he was gone." Thomas pressed a hand to his mouth, the truth settling over him with crushing force. "That means," his voice failed him, "that Noah is your grandson," Claire finished softly. There was no celebration, no dramatic reaction, just stunned silence, broken only by the sound of someone quietly sobbing. Victoria sank into the nearest chair, the world narrowing to the woman in front of her and the child sleeping miles away, unaware that his life had just been rewritten. Grief and shock twisted together, inseparable. She had lost a son, and in the same moment found him again, through a boy she had only just come to know. Around them, the celebration had ceased to exist. The music venue, the guests, the elegant setting, all of it faded into irrelevance. What remained was truth, and nothing about it could ever be undone. They did not return home that night as planned. The celebration ended quietly, without announcements or explanations. Guests left with uneasy expressions, sensing that something private and irreversible had occurred. Claire remained seated in a small side room of the venue, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of water she had barely touched. Victoria and Thomas stayed with her, the three of them suspended in a moment that refused to move forward. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was low but steady, as if she had already exhausted every tear she had. She told them about Evan as he had been then, young, impatient, convinced the world would wait for him. They had met by chance, fallen into something intense and reckless, the kind of love that burned too fast. When she became pregnant, fear overtook reason. Evan thought she was leaving him. Claire believed he had chosen his pride over her. Words were said that could not be taken back. They separated without understanding what they were truly losing. "I found out I was pregnant after he left," Claire said. "By the time I worked up the courage to tell him, he was already gone." She learned of Evan's death months later. By then, she was carrying a child alone, grieving a man who never knew he had become a father. Pride kept her silent. Survival demanded everything else. Victoria listened without interruption, each detail cutting deeper than the last. She saw her son clearly now, not as the memory she had preserved, but as the young man he had been, flawed and human, capable of mistakes. Thomas closed his eyes as Claire spoke, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He had always believed Evan would return home eventually. That belief had died hard. Grief came again, sharp and fresh, but it did not come alone. It came with the undeniable knowledge that Evan had left something behind. Noah. The following days unfolded slowly, carefully. Conversations were measured. Decisions were made without pressure. Victoria insisted on medical consultations for Noah immediately. Specialists confirmed what Claire had already been told. The improperly healed fracture could be corrected with surgery. It would be complex but successful. The cost was high. Victoria did not hesitate. "You don't have to worry about that anymore," she said simply. The surgery was scheduled at a private children's hospital outside Austin. Claire stayed with Noah every moment she was allowed. Thomas and Victoria visited daily. When Noah woke from anesthesia, groggy and frightened, Thomas was there beside him, his hand steady and reassuring. Recovery was slow but hopeful. Physical therapy followed. Noah endured it with quiet determination, encouraged by Thomas, who understood persistence better than most. Progress came in small victories, a few steps, a longer stretch, less pain. When Noah was strong enough, Victoria suggested a visit to the cemetery. They went together on a clear morning. The headstone was modest, shaded by an old oak tree. Evan's name was etched simply, without adornment. Claire stood back at first, watching as Victoria traced the letters with her fingers. Thomas bowed his head, his shoulders shaking silently. No words were spoken for a long time. Claire eventually stepped forward. "I wish I had told you sooner," she said. "I didn't know how." Victoria turned to her, her eyes tired but calm. "We all did what we thought we had to," she said. "That doesn't mean it didn't matter." Noah watched quietly, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. He placed a small flower at the base of the stone, imitating the adults without question. The truth could no longer wait. That evening, Thomas asked Noah to sit with him in the living room. Claire and Victoria remained nearby, but out of sight. Thomas spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "There's something important I want to tell you," he said gently. "Something about your family." Noah listened, serious and attentive. Thomas explained that Evan had been Noah's father, that he had loved music, that he had been kind and stubborn and brave, that he had not known about Noah, but that he would have loved him deeply. Noah did not cry. He asked a few questions, then he nodded, absorbing the truth with the quiet resilience of a child who had already faced more than most. "So that means," he said, slowly looking at Thomas. "Yes," Thomas replied, his voice unsteady but warm. "That means we're your grandparents." Noah smiled, tentative at first, then brighter. He leaned forward and hugged Thomas carefully. From that moment on, something settled into place. The loss remained. It always would, but it no longer stood alone. Evan was gone, yet through Noah, his presence had found its way back home. The video appeared online less than 12 hours later. Someone at the anniversary celebration, no one ever discovered who, had recorded Claire's performance on a phone. The lighting was imperfect, the angle uneven. But none of that mattered. What people saw was a woman standing alone on a stage she had never expected to be on, singing without polish, without protection, without performance tricks. Her voice carried something raw and unmistakable. Grief, love, memory. By morning, the video had been shared thousands of times. By nightfall, it had millions of views. Claire did not know any of this at first. She was at the hospital with Noah, helping him through physical therapy, encouraging him through the exercises that still frightened him. It was Victoria who noticed her phone vibrating nonstop in the kitchen that evening. Messages, missed calls, unknown numbers, emails piling up faster than they could be read. Media outlets followed quickly. Local news first, then national entertainment blogs. A short article appeared describing the caregiver with a voice that stopped a room cold. Someone tracked down her name. Another person unearthed the Lawson anniversary connection. Speculation multiplied. Within days, representatives arrived, polite, confident people who spoke quickly and smiled often. They talked about potential, timing, and momentum. One producer suggested a professional recording. Another mentioned branding. A third gently recommended that Claire consider a stage name. Something simpler, softer, memorable. Claire listened in a kind of daze. She had dreamed of singing once. Long ago, back when dreaming felt harmless. But life had demanded practicality instead. Survival, responsibility, Noah. The idea that this moment, this accident, could turn into something real felt unreal. Against her instincts, she agreed to try. The studio was overwhelming at first. Bright lights, headphones too large for her head, instructions delivered in technical language she barely understood. The first sessions were exhausting. Her voice cracked. Her confidence wavered. But the producers were patient, encouraging. They told her what she needed to hear. When the first professionally recorded track was released, the response was immediate. She adopted the stage name Mia Cole at the insistence of her team. They said it sounded modern, marketable, separate from her private life. Success accelerated. Interviews were scheduled back to back. Short trips turned into longer ones. Cities blurred together. Hotels replaced home. She learned how to smile on cue, how to answer questions without revealing too much, how to repeat carefully crafted phrases about gratitude and destiny and hard work. But each return home became shorter. Noah stayed with Victoria and Thomas more often now. At first, he seemed proud. He told his classmates that his mom sang on the radio. He watched clips of her performances online, wide-eyed and impressed. But pride faded into confusion. Confusion into quiet resentment. He stopped asking when she would be back. When she returned from one trip, exhausted and hollowed out, Noah barely looked up from his tablet. When she reached for him, he leaned away, just slightly. Enough to hurt. "You're always leaving," he said one evening, his voice small but firm. Claire tried to explain. She talked about work, about opportunities, about how this could help them long-term. Noah listened politely, the way children do when they don't feel heard. "I don't need more toys," he said. "I just want you here." The words stayed with her long after he fell asleep. Fame took more than time. It took privacy. Photographers appeared outside the Lawson home. Online comments dissected her appearance, her past, her choices. Some praised her. Others judged her harshly. Every move felt watched. Every silence interpreted. She began to feel split into Mia Cole on stage, confident and luminous, and Claire Dawson at home, anxious and aching, unsure which version of herself was more real. Victoria noticed the change. Thomas did too. They did not criticize. They waited. One night, after Claire returned from a particularly draining trip, she sat alone in the guest room, still in her coat, unable to bring herself to unpack. The house was quiet, too quiet. She realized she could not remember the last time she had walked Noah to school, or cooked dinner with him, or simply sat beside him without checking the time. The dream she had once imagined felt strangely heavy now. Fame had arrived like a gift, but it was asking for more than she had ever intended to give. Ryan Brooks did not arrive with noise or urgency. He appeared quietly, almost by accident, after one of Claire's smaller studio sessions. He had been listed as a mutual contact by a producer who remembered Evan mentioning his name years ago. Ryan had worked in construction management, steady and unremarkable by industry standards, the kind of man people trusted without needing to explain why. When he recognized Claire, there was no shock, no celebrity awe, only recognition. "You haven't changed," he said gently, then corrected himself. "You have, but not in the ways people think." They spoke over coffee at first. Then again a week later. Ryan never asked about contracts or charts or views. He asked about Noah, about how she slept, about whether she was eating properly. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did, his words were measured, thoughtful. He remembered Evan clearly, remembered the jokes, the recklessness, the unfinished plans. "He loved you," Ryan said one evening simply. He just didn't know how to be brave at the right moment. There was no drama in the way he said it, no accusation, just truth. One night, after a performance that left Claire drained and hollow, Ryan suggested they leave the city for a few hours. No press, no phones, no schedule, just air and silence. They drove west, away from Austin's lights, until the roads thinned and the noise faded. They stopped near a quiet lake just before dawn. Claire sat on the hood of the car, wrapped in Ryan's jacket, watching the sky slowly change color. For the first time in months, no one needed anything from her. No expectations, no cameras, no rehearsed gratitude. She thought of Noah, how he used to fall asleep on her shoulder, how his hand always searched for hers in unfamiliar places. She thought of the way he had looked at her lately, guarded and careful, as if preparing himself for disappointment. "I don't want to lose him," she said suddenly. Ryan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was calm. "Then don't." The decision, once made, felt startlingly clear. Returning to the city, Claire met with her management team. The conversation was tense. They spoke of penalties, breached agreements, lost momentum. They warned her that leaving now meant burning bridges, that the spotlight would not wait for her return. Claire listened. Then she nodded. "I understand," she said, "but I'm done." The financial consequences were significant. Contracts dissolved. Fees were paid. Headlines speculated. Some praised her courage. Others called it foolish. She did not respond. Claire packed quietly. She gathered Noah's things herself. Schoolbooks, clothes, the small keepsakes he treasured. When she told him they were leaving, really leaving this time, his face searched hers carefully. "You're not going away again?" he asked. "No," she said without hesitation. "I'm staying." They moved into Ryan's modest home, just outside the city. It wasn't large. It wasn't polished, but it was warm, predictable, safe. Ryan adjusted without ceremony. He learned Noah's routines, helped with homework, sat through long, awkward silences without trying to fill them. Slowly, Noah began to trust him, not because he was asked to, but because Ryan never demanded it. Claire returned to being herself. She wore jeans again, let her hair grow back to its natural color. She sang sometimes softly, in the kitchen or late at night when the house was asleep. No microphones, no audience, just sound. Victoria and Thomas visited often. They understood without explanation. Thomas, in particular, watched Noah laugh again and felt a quiet satisfaction settle into his chest. "You chose well," he told Claire one afternoon. "Not everyone does." The world moved on as it always did. New stars rose. New stories replaced hers. Claire did not look back. She had not chosen escape. She had chosen home. The wedding was small. There were no photographers, no announcements, no carefully curated moments meant for strangers. Claire wore a simple dress. She chose herself, unremarkable except for how comfortable she felt in it. Ryan stood beside her, steady and calm, his hands warm when he took hers. Noah watched from the front row, legs swinging slightly, a nervous smile breaking across his face when Claire looked at him. They married on a clear morning, under open sky, with only family present. Victoria and Thomas sat together, close enough to hear every word. When Claire said her vows, her voice did not shake. She was not afraid of promising a future anymore. She knew exactly what she was choosing. Life afterward did not change dramatically, and that was the point. Claire and Ryan settled into a rhythm that was quiet and dependable. Mornings began early, with school lunches packed and coffee brewed before the sun fully rose. Evenings ended with shared meals and conversations that did not need to impress anyone. There were no surprises, no sudden absences, no unanswered questions. Claire recorded music occasionally, but only when she wanted to. A small home studio replaced the pressure of professional spaces. She sang when inspiration came and stopped when it didn't. Some recordings were shared privately. Others remained just for her. There were no deadlines, no contracts, no expectations beyond honesty. Music returned to its proper place in her life, not as an escape, not as an identity, but as a companion. Noah changed the most. The quiet tension that once lived in his shoulders eased. He laughed more easily, slept through the night. His teachers noticed the difference. His limp became a memory rather than a defining feature, the surgery and rehabilitation leaving him stronger than before. He grew confident in the knowledge that someone would always be there when he came home. Ryan never tried to replace Evan. He never spoke over his memory or reshaped it. Instead, he stood beside Noah, consistent and present. He helped with homework, taught him how to ride a bike properly, fixed things around the house, and explained how they worked. When Noah called him Dad for the first time, Ryan did not react outwardly. He simply nodded, as if he had been waiting for the moment to arrive on its own. Victoria and Thomas became a constant presence again, not visitors, but family woven into daily life. They attended school events, birthdays, quiet Sunday dinners. Thomas taught Noah chess and patience. Victoria helped with projects, corrected essays, and listened when Noah talked endlessly about whatever had captured his attention that week. The house that once felt hollow now held voices again. For Victoria, the change was profound. She no longer carried everything alone. The weight she had borne for years eased, not because the past had disappeared, but because it had finally settled into something complete. Their son was gone, but not erased. His life had left something behind that would continue long after them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the family gathered around the table, Victoria watched Noah talk animatedly about school, while Ryan listened with focused attention. Claire caught Victoria's eye across the room, a small, knowing smile passing between them. Nothing needed to be said. There was no revenge in this story, no dramatic victory, no public justice delivered under bright lights. Only continuity, only the quiet understanding that family is not always found where it begins, but when it is found, it must be chosen again and again without hesitation. Claire chose it, and for the first time in her life, she knew she had chosen well.